The Grovewood Inn shimmered against the evening sky, golden light spilling from tall windows across its stone terrace. Guests in suits and glittering gowns clinked glasses as a string quartet played inside. But when I stepped to the hostess stand, clutching a silver-wrapped gift, I was not greeted with warmth. My name was not on the list. My son's eyes met mine, his mouth curving not into a smile, but a cold dismissal. "Mom," he said sharply, "you weren't invited." In that instant, before 100 watching eyes, every sacrifice I had made seemed to collapse into silence. Yet what he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that the very ground beneath his life had been built by my hands, and I still held the power to reshape it. After Robert's sudden heart attack, I had become both mother and father to Preston. He was 12, too young to understand the weight that had fallen on my shoulders. I promised him that his father's absence wouldn't mean the end of his chances. So I took double shifts serving soup until midnight at Mission Hospital's cafeteria, scrubbing cabins in the Blue Ridge at dawn, stretching every dollar until my hands cracked and my back screamed. When friends invited me out, I declined, because the bills always outweighed the invitations. Preston was my reason for everything. When he brought home his acceptance letter to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I wept in the kitchen, clutching that envelope as though it were salvation. He never knew that I had sold my wedding band to help pay his deposit, or that the second-hand furniture we hauled into his dorm was bought with borrowed money. Later, when he dreamed of a condo in Charlotte, I refinanced the modest house Robert and I had built together. Friends were traveling to Italy, joining book clubs, living in ease, but I clipped coupons and stretched casseroles, convincing myself every sacrifice was another seed planted in Preston's future. The day he graduated, I stood in the crowd as his name echoed across the stage. That moment, I believed, was my return on investment, proof that every sleepless night, every hunger pang, had been worth it. For years after, he called me on Sundays just to hear my voice. He would raid my pantry for blueberry preserves, tease me about folding his laundry even as an adult. But when Clarissa entered his life, something shifted. She was polished and sharp, the kind of beauty that belonged in magazines, impressive from afar, impossible up close. At first, I tried to welcome her. We strolled the farmer's market on Charlotte Street, but afterward, she told Preston my life seemed small. Over holidays, she placed me at the far end of the table, smiling sweetly as she remarked that my house was cozy. Her words were needles wrapped in silk. Slowly, I saw Preston begin to echo her judgments. He corrected my manners, urged me not to say too much, insisted appearances mattered more than comfort. When their anniversary came, I thought my presence might mend the rift. I assembled a photo album, Robert in the backyard with Preston, fishing trips along the French Broad River, birthdays and scraped knees. I imagined handing it to him, reminding him of who held him through storms. But at the Grovewood Inn, Clarissa's eyes flicked to the gift and away. "Leave it with the staff," she said lightly. Preston muttered, "This is embarrassing." "Mom?" People are staring. Laughter swelled behind him, swallowing me whole. I held the box tighter, whispered, "Of course," and walked into the cold mountain night, invisible. At home, humiliation turned to clarity. I set the album on the table, poured a glass of Merlot, and opened the old safe box Robert had left behind. Inside lay nearly $2 million in bonds, deeds, and accounts, the fruit of years of quiet diligence. I had always intended it for Preston, believing inheritance meant giving him the security I never had. But as I spread the papers across the table, their numbers glared back like an accusation. My son had turned me away, embarrassed to claim me as his own, and yet I still clung to the idea of giving him everything. I drafted notes, altering the will, redirecting the estate. My pen hovered, hesitated. I left the papers unfinished, telling myself that if Preston knocked on my door, if he remembered who I truly was, perhaps a bridge might still remain. By morning, my phone pulsed with dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts. Preston's voice seethed in the first message. "What the hell do you think you're doing? The venue says the payment bounced. Fix this now." Another, slurred with champagne, accused me of humiliating them. By midnight, his tone cracked. "Mom, please, don't let this ruin everything." Clarissa's texts ranged from venom to desperation. "You embarrassed us. Make this right. We can work this out if you fix it." I scrolled past them all, steady, for the first time not scrambling to clean up their mess. That night, pounding rattled my front door. I opened it to find Preston disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. Clarissa pushed past, heels striking the floor, perfume sharp. "You owe us," she snapped. "After everything we've built, you can't just walk away. We are family. Marjorie, you can't do this." I looked at Preston, the boy I once carried through Asheville's markets, now hollow-eyed and desperate. My voice was calm. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Clarissa's mouth fell open. Preston's shoulders slumped. The perfect world they had built trembled around them. And for once, I stood steady, knowing their unraveling had only begun. Clarissa's composure cracked in my hallway, her voice rising as she paced. "You think this is about money? It's about appearances. Marjorie, you don't understand how people look at us. Your old-fashioned ways, your plain clothes, they don't belong in the circles we move in. That's why I told Preston you couldn't be there. You ruined the image we've built." Her words were a confession, bitter and unrepentant. Cutting through the silence, I turned my eyes to Preston, waiting to see if he would defend her or himself. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Clarissa, stop," he muttered, but she pressed on, sharp and relentless. "She doesn't fit, Preston, and you know it. That's why we—" "Enough!" Preston's voice cracked like a whip. His hands raked through his hair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of years he had carried without ever admitting it. He looked at me, hollow-eyed, his mask gone. "She's been paying for everything. Clarissa, the mortgage, the dinner, half the damn life we live, it's her. Not us. Without her, we have nothing." The words dropped heavy into the air, stunning us all. Clarissa froze, disbelief etched on her face. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, but Preston couldn't meet her eyes. "For 3 years, she's carried us, and I let you believe it was me. I let everyone believe it was me." His voice trailed, the admission tearing through the illusion they had carefully built. Clarissa's expression curdled. "You mean to tell me all this time we've been living on her money?" Her voice cracked with outrage and fear. Silence followed, suffocating and thick. Their superiority, their perfection, their pride, it all shattered in an instant. I stood steady, watching as the truth peeled them bare. That night, long after their angry footsteps faded from my doorway, I sat with the estate papers spread across my kitchen table. The hesitation I had felt before was gone. By morning, I was clear. I packed the documents into my bag and drove into downtown Asheville. The courthouse bell striking 9 as I climbed the narrow stairs to Mr. Donnelly's office. He had managed Robert's estate since the beginning, his calm demeanor a steady presence through the years. When he saw me, his eyes softened with quiet understanding, as though he already knew why I had come. I laid the papers on his desk and spoke without tremor. I want to change the will. Not a cent goes to Preston. Not anymore. His brows lifted slightly, but he nodded. And instead, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, scholarships for single mothers at UNC Asheville, women who need a hand to keep their children's dreams alive. Saying it out loud, I felt the decision fall into place as if it had always been waiting. Mr. Donnelly smiled faintly, a legacy of dignity, when he slid the revised documents across the desk. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, each stroke final and unshakable. The pen felt heavy, then lighter, as though something long carried had been set down. When I stepped back into the street, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the stone buildings. I drew in a deep breath, the weight of years lifting as I walked to my car. Weeks slipped by. Neighbors whispered that Preston and Clarissa had put their grand house on the market, their manicured lawn a witness to unraveling pride. Asheville society, always hungry for stories, murmured about the couple who had turned away the mother holding their fortune. I corrected no one. Let the truth live on in whispers. It was no longer mine to defend. At home, my days softened into rhythm again. Morning coffee, walks in the garden. Sylvia from church brought rose cuttings. I planted dogwoods along the back fence, their roots sinking into soil that would outlast me. We spoke of ordinary things, recipes, books, the laughter of children as our hands worked in the dirt. The air around me felt lighter, easier. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with the unopened photo album still resting beside me. I didn't need to unwrap it. The memories lived within me. Robert's laugh, Preston's small hand clutched in mine, the slam of the screen door on summer nights. They belonged to me, not to the man my son had become. Inheritance, I realized, wasn't measured in money or deeds. It was in the lessons we leave behind, the grit to stand firm, the wisdom to walk away, the courage to choose dignity over approval. The seasons turned quietly, and with them, so did my heart. Autumn spilled gold across the Blue Ridge, leaves scattering like embers down the winding streets of Asheville. Each morning, I walked the garden with my coffee, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. My neighbors waved from their porches, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with respect. Word of Preston and Clarissa's unraveling had spread far, but no one dared ask me outright. I let the silence answer for me. Preston's calls became less frequent, each one a thread thinner than the last. At first, his messages carried desperation. "Mom, please. Clarissa doesn't understand. I can fix this if you just..." But over time, they shifted, the anger bleeding into regret, the regret into silence. Eventually, the phone stopped buzzing altogether. Clarissa's name never lit my screen again. I heard from friends that their home had sold for less than they owed. The facade that once gleamed with pride now sat dark, its lawn unkempt, its windows vacant. They had moved somewhere smaller, though no one seemed to know where. In the gossip-laced currents of Asheville society, The couple who once commanded attention had vanished into whispers. For me, life became simpler, steadier. I took comfort in the small rituals that had always carried me through the rhythm of chopping vegetables for stew. The scent of fresh laundry hung to dry, the warmth of my porch at dusk. Each task felt like reclaiming pieces of myself long given away. The humiliation of the Grovewood Inn no longer a wound, but a scar I could trace without flinching. Sometimes, late at night, I found myself looking at the photo album, still wrapped, still waiting. It was not a gift for Preston anymore. It had become a testament for me, proof that love, sacrifice, and devotion cannot be erased by someone else's rejection. I left it on the shelf, a quiet reminder that my story was mine to hold. The scholarship fund began to take shape faster than I expected. Mr. Donnelly called one morning with the news that the first applications had already come in, single mothers balancing jobs and classes, their stories mirroring echoes of my own past. One woman wrote that she wanted her daughter to believe nothing was impossible, even if she had to work 3 jobs to prove it. Another said she dreamed of becoming a nurse, but could not afford tuition after her husband left. Reading their words, tears pricked my eyes, but not with sorrow, with recognition. These women were not strangers. They were me, 20 years earlier, standing in hospital kitchens with aching feet, scrubbing cabins at dawn, clinging to hope as though it were a lifeline. And now, because of Robert's diligence and my decision, their paths would be eased. My sacrifices would ripple forward into lives I would never meet. It struck me then true inheritance was not in passing down wealth to those who rejected it, but in planting seeds where they could bloom. The legacy I left behind would not be squandered on appearances or vanity. It would live in classrooms, in late-night study sessions, in children who would someday walk across graduation stages with their mothers watching from the crowd. That was the return I had been searching for all along. Evenings on the porch grew softer with Sylvia's company. She brought peach cobbler or stories from her grandchildren, her laughter spilling easily into the quiet. Together, we tended the garden, watching the dogwoods take root, their pale blossoms stretched toward the sky, a promise of seasons yet to come. Sometimes, I caught myself smiling not from triumph, but from peace. I thought often about Preston, though not with bitterness. He had been shaped by choices, some his, some whispered into him by a woman who believed perfection was more important than love. Perhaps one day he would find his way back, though I no longer built my life around the possibility. The door was not locked, but it no longer stood waiting. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the garden in amber light, I pressed my hands into the soil beside the new dogwoods. Their roots would outlast me, anchoring into earth that had carried me through storms. And as I sat there, the truth settled in fully dignity is not given. It is claimed, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, but always with strength. Winter crept into Asheville with its quiet chill. The mountains dusted white, the streets hushed beneath frost. My little bungalow held its own warmth, not from grand fireplaces or lavish dinners, but from the simple comforts I could trust: my kettle hissing on the stove, the hum of the old heater in the hall, the steady tick of the mantel clock. It was in these still moments that I began to see my life differently. For so long, I had measured my worth through Preston, his milestones, his successes, his happiness. I had poured myself out until there was nothing left. But now, in the calm that followed the storm, I realized I was still here, still whole, still able to choose. Christmas came without invitations. The phone remained silent, and though I saw neighbors gather for family meals, I stayed home, content with a small roast chicken and the glow of candles in the window. There was a time when loneliness would have swallowed me then. But this year, it felt different. The absence was no longer a wound. It was space. Space to breathe, to remember, to reclaim. I thought of Robert, of how he had laughed with his whole chest, how he had built this house with his hands, how he had left behind the means for me to stand tall, even when everything else crumbled. His legacy was not just in dollars, it was in strength. And in that strength, I found myself again. News of Preston and Clarissa reached me only in fragments. A neighbor mentioned seeing him at a grocery store. Thinner, worn, his once perfect suits replaced by rumpled jackets. Someone else said Clarissa had stopped appearing at charity luncheons, her absence noted by the very women she had once tried so hard to impress. It seemed the life they had built on borrowed pride was unraveling thread by thread. I listened, nodded politely, and let the stories drift past me like winter wind. They were no longer mine to carry. The scholarship fund grew. Letters poured in from young women whose lives were being changed, their gratitude etched into every word. One wrote that she had passed her nursing exam, her little boy cheering as she walked across the stage. Another said she had bought her first set of textbooks without choosing between tuition and groceries. Their victories became my quiet joy, each one a confirmation that my choice had not been made in anger, but in purpose. One January afternoon, I walked with Sylvia through the garden, now bare and brittle under the cold. She slipped her arm through mine and said softly, "You know, Marjorie, you gave him everything a mother could give, but now you've given yourself something too, freedom." Her words settled deep in me. Freedom. It was a word I hadn't dared claim for myself in years, yet it fit. No longer bound by appearances, expectations, or unreturned devotion. I was free to live the life I still had left. In the evenings, I sometimes lit the fireplace and opened the photo album at last. Page after page of memories spilled into my lap, Robert grinning with Preston on his shoulders, birthday candles glowing on homemade cakes, scraped knees patched with band-aids and kisses. These were the treasures no rejection could erase. I smiled through the tears, not from regret, but from the fullness of a life lived with love, even if it was not always returned. Spring arrived quietly, the dogwoods budding again, their blossoms pale against the warming sky. I planted herbs along the fence line, filled flower pots for the porch, and let my days unfold gently. The shadows of the Grovewood Inn, of Clarissa's sharp words, of Preston's cold dismissal, grew dimmer with each sunrise. They had been chapters in my story, but they were not the ending. And so, life moved forward, not in grand leaps, but in steady steps. Coffee at dawn, laughter with a friend, the quiet satisfaction of knowing my choices had meaning. I no longer chased approval that would never come. Instead, I walked with dignity, with the knowledge that the truest inheritance I could leave was not wealth, but the strength to stand tall, even when the world tries to diminish you. Summer returned with warmth spilling across the Blue Ridge, the air heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. My days fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoons in the garden, evenings with Sylvia or a good book. Life was quieter, yes, but it was steady, and for the first time in decades, It belonged entirely to me. The scholarship foundation blossomed in ways I hadn't imagined. Letters and photographs arrived each month, mothers in caps and gowns, children waving signs that read, "We're proud of you, Mom." Families gathered around tables where hope now had a seat. One young woman wrote that she had finally finished her teaching degree after nearly giving up. Another sent me a picture of her son, holding her diploma as though it were his own. Each envelope reminded me that sacrifice, when planted in the right soil, could bloom into futures far brighter than I had ever dreamed. Preston never came back. Not with an apology. Not with excuses. I heard whispers that Clarissa had left him, that the debts had mounted too high, that his once polished world had cracked beyond repair. For a while, I wondered if I should feel sorrow, or if some small part of me should extend one more hand. But when those thoughts came, I remembered the Grovewood Inn, the cold curve of his lips, the way he asked me to leave before people stared. The album I carried pressed to my chest. That moment had been my answer. Sometimes love requires letting go, even of the very people we once thought were our purpose. On a warm June afternoon, I sat on my porch with the album finally unwrapped. The photographs inside were faded, but alive Robert's arm around my shoulder, Preston grinning through missing teeth, birthday cakes with lopsided frosting, summer trips to the French Broad River. These pages held my truest legacy, love given without hesitation, devotion carried through hardship, a life of dignity carved from sacrifice. And as I turned the final page, I realized I no longer held them for Preston's memory. I held them for mine. The garden bloomed wildly that summer. Dogwoods stretched taller, roses spilled across the fence line, and herbs filled the air with fragrance. I knelt in the soil, pressing my palms into the earth, feeling its steady coolness beneath my fingers. This was the inheritance I wanted to leave, not just in deeds or scholarships, but in the reminder that dignity, once chosen, cannot be taken away. In the end, life taught me a truth I wish I had seen sooner. Approval fades. Appearances shatter. Even family can falter. But the strength to stand firm, to walk away when you are diminished, to choose dignity over desperation, that is what endures. That is the legacy worth leaving. So if you've stayed with me through this journey, I'll leave you with this: never measure your worth by someone else's acceptance. Measure it by the love you've given, the strength you've found, and the dignity you've claimed. Because true inheritance isn't about what we pass down, it's about the courage to live in a way that leaves the world a little stronger, a little kinder, because we were here. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts below. Your support helps keep stories like this alive.